Anna, could you please call the roll?
Here.
Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Here.
Here, would you please rise and join me for a flag salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, folks, tonight we're talking about the transfer of the property between Little Flower, the Church of Little Flower and the Township of Berkeley Heights and the municipal complex. We will be discussing some financial issues today, and we have a host of guests here to speak on that. Just to go over the rules of our meeting, we will have the presenters present. After each presenter presents, then the council will then have an opportunity to answer questions. Then I will open up to people from the public to answer questions based on the presentation and the presentation only, and then we'll move on to the next presenter. At the end of the meeting, we will then open it up for questions, comments based on tonight's presentation. Now I ask you folks, just because you get the mic in front of you doesn't mean everybody wants to hear a long speech from you. They don't. Okay, and you don't from me, but you have to because I'm conducting the meeting. So, let's make we're going to go up to 4 minute, a total of 4 minutes for each question. We're going to increase it by 1 minute because we want everybody to get their thoughts out. But we want the thoughts concise and to the point. Again, questions. I may ask you for your question if you're making statements. So please bear with us. We want everybody at the mic to feel comfortable at the mic because I know some people aren't comfortable in front of a mic. So please give them their courtesy when they're speaking. All right, fair enough? Okay. So on that note, I'd like to turn it over to Michael Mistretta, our town planner, who will be our master of ceremonies for tonight.
Thank you. Good evening. To pick up where we left off last week, tonight's presentation is going to focus primarily on the improvements that are proposed at 2 locations. What if we move the municipal complex over to the Church of the Little Flower campus and the Snyder Avenue properties? And what would happen if we reconstructed the municipal complex at the Park Avenue site where we are tonight? We're going to go through a discussion. The architects will go through a discussion of the needs study, including a presentation of the deficiencies of the existing structures and all of the existing structures being administration building, public works building, police, et cetera. And then we're going to do a review of the cost estimates. We're going to do a review of the needs of each of the different groups that would be part of the complex at either site. And then we're going to provide a summary at the end of tries to summarize all the data that you're going to hear in the beginning down to one piece of paper. Option 1, option 2. You're going to hear a lot of different numbers and square footages and figures and so forth. And what we've tried to do is condense everything that you've heard up to date onto one piece of paper for each option. And that'll be shown as a PowerPoint. You'll see the numbers on there, construction cost estimates, cost of the swap, cost of all the various costs, soft costs, et cetera. And we tried to reduce it down to one piece of paper for you to make it as clear as possible. And then we're going to, after the architects are finished, we're going to have the auditors, the township auditors speak and address what's the impact on the average assessed residential property in Berkeley Heights and what that would mean as far as your tax dollars, which is one of the numbers everybody's been waiting for. So before I hand it over to Mr. Iovino, there were some documents at the last meeting that people requested. I just want to make sure that people are aware. We may not necessarily go into them in depth tonight, but there's requests last time for the environmental abatement, the asbestos removal, what the cost estimates would be, and how much of the asbestos is located at the campus, the Church of Little Flower campus. I just want to point those out because those documents are being included in your binder and your CDs that you're going to pick up. And for those people who asked for that information, you'll see that all in there. Again, the entire PowerPoint presentation, everything that we talked about tonight, you'll be able to pick up on the CD at no cost from the Township Clerk's office. Unlike last week when my office had the time to put together 25 or 30 of them, and I was able to bring them to last week's meeting. I apologize, I wasn't able to there's a lot of documents. Tonight's a big presentation, so I wasn't able to do that tonight, but my office will assemble all of those tomorrow, and we'll get those up to Ann as quickly as possible. With that, I would like to turn it over to Anthony Iovino from GRA Architects and Iovino Architects. Thank you.
We're going to move to those seats so we can see the presentation. Okay, cool.
Good evening, everybody. It's good to be back here for this week's presentation. I believe most of you were there last week for the library presentation. Tonight's format for my work, for our offices, our team's work, will follow along those lines. Up on the screen outlines what the agenda is for us. I'd like to talk about the existing buildings first in terms of their deficiencies, some images, and then an overview of the study that our team did almost 2 years ago at this point, and then get into our findings for that in terms of what the needs were for the police building, the administration building, and the options in terms of conceptual layouts for those spaces. And then ultimately at the end, we'll talk about the bottom line numbers for the construction of the project. Is it possible for some of you to come down a bit closer as well? That's as big as that image goes. Is it possible to dim the lights at the front of the room? As I go along, there's a couple of slides that I will zoom into. This helps. Thank you. But so if any time during the presentation, if you can't see it, and I can tell you I was back there and my eyes aren't the best, so I couldn't see it, just shout out. It's okay, politely. Okay, well, we're past that slide, so I'm going on to the next. All right, so these are just photos. I'm going to leave them at that scale. The intent here is to just make you familiar, especially if you aren't familiar with them, the existing building. So this is the town hall, and we have a ton of photos, but these two just give you the taste of what the outside of the building is. The building has been added on to a number of times. There's a few different literal outbuildings that go along with this for police and the construction department. The one shot here on the right-hand side is the clerk's office, which is an open office with a few desks in it as opposed to private offices, and we'll talk about that in the deficiency list. For the police department, it's a little bit more based on safety. So you have images here where both the prisoner entrance, which is the bottom left, and the public entrance, which you also get into for the council chambers, you're up a set of stairs. There's no ADA compliance whatsoever at that building, at the whole complex. The image in the top right is a trailer, right? That's where the chief told me there are 7 different staff members there. It's the detectives area. And then the bottom right image is an area where the prisoners come in, and one of the things that's real critical about police departments is the separation of prisoner access and their pathways, civilian access. If you're coming to the department to pick up a report, or if there's a domestic issue, et cetera, and even their own staff and their own civilian staff. Those should all be separate pathways, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as well, but they're commingled in this building. And then lastly, the DPW garage building, which is tucked behind on Park Avenue, and that's really the dominant building there. There's the Salt Dome that you know. The impound lot for the police is back there as well, so it's not the prettiest area. That's why it's in the back. Okay, so I will zoom in on this one. That's about as good as I can get. I'll read a couple of highlights to you. All right, the top grouping is about barrier-free ADA issues. So throughout the whole site, there are not enough or any, well, I think you have just a pair of handicap parking stalls on the one corner, but not for the municipal and the police department entrances. Both entrances are not accessible, right? So the stairs that I pointed out in the photos are obviously not accessible access ways. The toilet rooms are not accessible, and even the council chambers, the dais is up a rise, and then even the work session in the back is up another rise, and there are no ramps to get there. In a new building, and as I talked about last week about the library, government buildings are no longer grandfathered in. They have to be compliant, and they have to be compliant many years ago, and it's not triggered by any other construction. They simply have to be compliant. So you're vulnerable right now to a potential lawsuit because the ADA is a federal law. The barrier-free code is part of the building code. They're two different things, same intent, but enforced very differently. Safety and security items for the municipal building. You have multiple access points into the building. Less of an issue than at the library that I talked about last week, because it's mostly about adults, and some of the building is open at different times. But I know, like, when we go to the council meetings like last week, you can meander to the bathrooms and be in these back offices, and the lights are off, and nobody knows you're back there. So you have to be able to control where the public goes, the public that shouldn't be there, right? And allow you to go where you need to go. There is some asbestos in the building, and in the basement of this building, and this is true in police and for the municipal building, there are no fire sprinklers at the archive areas, which there should be. A new building would have. Energy issues, majority of these windows are single pane windows. They haven't been touched in many years, especially the older parts of the building. The air conditioning heating system needs work. And you're going to see the same comments there for the police building. General functional issues, you need a variety of conference rooms. Anytime that we design municipal buildings, it's really about that flexibility where there's things you have to talk about in private, right? You have a tax issue. You shouldn't be standing in the hallway talking to the tax collector or assessor about issues. You have Department of Health, you have birth certificates, death certificates, other issues that are privacy issues that shouldn't be out in a hallway or an area where other people can hear you. So those are main concerns as well. So for the police, as I mentioned for the handicap issues, absolutely true there too, though, you might say, well, for fire departments, police departments, I'm not going to have a police officer who's in a wheelchair. It's not true. Your command center could be somebody who's in a wheelchair, right? You can have somebody who is temporarily disabled, right, on crutches, et cetera. That's the intent of that law, of that code, is to cover all those people equally. The safety and security items, this is paramount for a police department. My office designed a number of police departments, and we worked closely with the Department of Corrections. Police departments are the only municipal function that actually have their own code and guidelines that have to be followed and are reviewed by the state. So anytime that you go to add on to or significantly change your police department or make a new one, it has to be blessed at the state level at Department of Corrections. Why that is because it's about life safety. It's about safety and protection of evidence. It's about fairness to somebody who is being incarcerated. They're not automatically guilty, right? So you want to know that they have, due process. Their evidence is handled properly, et cetera. Department of Corrections covers that. One of the things that's really important is how that prisoner gets into the building. Many old police departments around the state have no garage. That's called a sally port, where patrol car would come in with the officer and the prisoner. They would open the garage door, it would come inside, the garage door would lock, and until that garage door closes, none of the other doors can open. That room, that garage has emergency buttons on it, et cetera. The reason for this is that the prisoners tend to realize what's happening to them right about that point when they're taken out of the car. So they tend to go off, if you will, and resist when they're being taken out. You want to be able to take the prisoner out safely out of the sally port, and I should say, even before the officer takes him out, he has to put his gun in a gun locker, right? So they can't wrestle the gun from the officer. You take the prisoner, now the inside door is released from the main desk, not that officer. They get into the processing area, and then the prisoner does not leave that processing area. They're put directly into a holding cell or an interview room. The way many older police departments are now, that prisoner process, like in the photo I showed you earlier, they cross paths with other officers that might have a firearm or other civilians that are either visiting or working there. So that is a real safety concern that is a red flag for the state. In terms of energy, same items, and in terms of functional items, overall, as we went through, and I'll talk about it more on the functional side, many of the rooms are undersized, and there are rooms that the state would want to see that don't even exist. Okay, the last efficiency list is on the DPW. This one is a little simpler. You know, the public isn't really there. It's about equipment, right, and storage, and the staff that they have themselves. So their office areas are also not barrier-free. The fueling area is inadequate in terms of its control. What we mean by that is, you know, the department head is responsible for how much fuel is taken. That can't be hidden away somewhere where anybody can tap into it. So that needs to be in a more secure area. Right now, they can't house all of their vehicles, and in the future needs, they can't house all of those vehicles. They need more bays. They need more bays for storage of salt and road materials and other equipment as well, for service bays, et cetera. There also are no female lockers. It's very odd that you will have females in both police department and DPWs, but you do. And the problem I see a lot of times, especially in police, where you tend to have more likelihood of having a female officer there, is the older departments don't even have female locker rooms, right? And what do you do? And there have been many lawsuits to different towns because of that. So simply having not an equal share, but a proportionate share of lockers and a bathroom and a shower, et cetera, for females to male makes sense. Okay, so back in 2012, GRA and my office together did a study. What we were asked to do, and I talked about this a bit last week, was to look at the administrative departments, the police department, the library. And by default after that, we also looked at the DPW after the report was filed. The point of that study, the goal of that, was to find out what the town needs ideally, not how it would fit into this building or that building, or what we feel like you need. It was really a lengthy process where we literally sat down with every department head and went through. These next two slides are pages. I'm not going to read it to you. Don't worry about reading it from back there. It's a sample. I think there are maybe about 35, 40 pages in our booklet of these interviews. The point of this was for us to take those needs and change them into the math, right? I said this last week. So what I was after was hearing from the chief and from the lieutenants of what their needs are, how they use the space, what's missing. I'll zoom into this one a bit. Perfect. So the left column, you can see lobby, dispatch, administration. These are departments, sub-departments, if you will, within the police department that we looked at in greater detail. Things like in the lobby, in the very top, I'll read the first 4 lines. It says vestibule, lobby restroom, soft interview room. What are those things? the soft interview room and the lobby restroom are things that the state wants to see there. I'll explain. A lot of times, the police departments are where somebody who's on the road, who's unfamiliar with the area, needs to use a restroom. They know the police department is manned 24/7. They'll go in there. If somebody needs to use the restroom, you do not want them to come in beyond the secure zone. So within the lobby, you simply have a unisex bathroom, right? The soft interview room is kind of a sensitive topic. It's really primarily about juvenile detainment and domestic disputes. So you might have a domestic dispute where both partners are there. One might come in from the lobby and be held in the soft interview room, not into the hardened, real sort of prisoner-looking spaces, jail-looking spaces. And the other person would come in from the prisoner handling side and come into another interview room. So you keep them separate. You don't want them to cross paths for safety reasons. So that's why the state wants a soft interview room. So there are spaces like that and female lockers, ammo storage, et cetera, that are very important within the police department. The prisoner handling category there is Sallyport processing, the interview room within the processing, right? You need a place where you can talk to this person and somebody is behind that one-way mirror or two-way mirror or whatever it's called that you see on TV all the time from the detectives bureau, right? So they can actually look in. The interview room has to be able to be recorded, both visual and audible recording per the Attorney General at the state level. And then you have a way to control evidence, right? So as I was talking about sort of the chain of command of a gun when an officer's bringing in a prisoner, same thing with evidence, right? Typically, that officer would come in with evidence. It goes to a single person or into a evidence locker. That one person who is responsible goes into the evidence room and pulls the evidence out from within the evidence room. And there are ways by state guidelines that they have to process and handle that chain of command of evidence. So it's really important that the police departments are able to follow those guidelines and maintain safety. This slide here is the summary of the administrative wing, and we have the library up here as well in this grouping. So this is everything but the police department. So in the same exercise that you just saw for the police, we have every one of those interview sheets in our report for the clerk, for the building department, et cetera, and that breakdown of each individual room and how big each individual room is, and we get to these totals here. So including the library, our target is 30,000 square feet, right? So that's the whole building, right? Again, except for police. This is the DPW, and given the number of bays that they need, given the amount of storage, the amount of service areas, the administration and support areas, our target is 24,500 square feet, right? So again, these are targets. These are guidelines for us to say, if we can fit certain things in the Church of the Little Flower property, wonderful. If we can fit it on Park Avenue site, wonderful. But what does it, how does it fit? What does it look like, et cetera? So that's the next step for us when we start looking at taking the math and trying to fit it into actual properties, right? So it's one thing to have the ideal target. The next thing is to have the realistic number. So this slide here, if, Mike, we don't have your boards, but at the last meeting we had those aerial boards, right? There were 4 boards showing all the properties. So this, I don't know how many of you are familiar with looking at aerials, but everybody gets on Google and Googles their house. Well, this is kind of the same thing. So we are, I don't know where we are right now. We're not on this thing. We're over there somewhere. So this is the Park Avenue site with the municipal building, right? The DPW site on Snyder is up there. I'm sorry, yeah, but, right, the sewer plant, forgive me. And then down here is the existing library and the church property. And what I'm going to do is just walk you through option 1 and option 2, which are, and basically, I don't know if I have this. Yeah, I do. So option 1 is simple, right? It's if we stay on Park Avenue, we have all of this property on Park Avenue that has the administration building, police, DPW, not the library, right? What if we were to temporarily move somewhere else, rebuild on that site? What would it be? And that's what that one focuses on. Option 2 deals with the Church of the Little Flower property and bringing DPW, police, library, administration, and community rec center to that one property, sort of an all-in-one. And how does it fit? And that's what I want to talk about as well. And I have more detail there than on option 1, because option 1 is quite simple, right? That's the aerial of option 1. The train tracks are here, right? At the top of the yellow line. The municipal building is there. All right, so this graphic basically shows what would happen is we would take that target square footage of the police and the municipal building and place it in a new building near the beginning of the road at Park and by the train tracks, kind of where it is now. The community center would be here. That's the existing salt dome, the circle. The existing light brown here, this is the existing DPW building, and then these two darker brown bars are new bays. The lighter tone here is the limit of the municipal property, from the train all the way back to there. Option 2, as I said earlier, involves the sewage treatment area, right, when some DPW work there, as well as the Church of the Little Flower. This site here would include the passive parts of the DPW. This is where the trucks would be exchanged to the active part. The active part would be at the Church of the Little Flower property, right? So this would have the salt dome, which would be used during the winter for salt, right? And then 2 storage bays. And this bay here, this truck building, is 90 feet from the property line. This would be a landscape buffer between any residential properties and the sewage treatment plant. So it's a very passive site. So the trucks, the more active trucks would be brought over to the main site and seasonally brought back to this site. No, this is option 2. And keep in mind, too, and I said this last week, and we even respond to one of our comments from last week on the library, right? A lot of people talked about parking, getting closer to the building for the library. Well, that's something that we're absolutely incorporating into this. So it's a very fluid process, right? This is the beginning of something. So the point of this meeting and this sessions that we've been having is to listen, right? So, you know, we can design this in the bubble, but the only people we'll hear are those department heads that we've talked to. So it's really important to get good comment, reasonable comment back in terms of how this works or doesn't work for you, and how you see that it could be better. Okay, so this is the main site. If some of you, let me see if I can go back one slide. Okay, so you'll recognize the L shape of the school building. This building here is the rectory building, and the rest of this is green space right now. What we're proposing is that the bulk of the DPW activity happens here, which is up against an industrial area. The police and the police impound areas would be behind here, out of view. The municipal building, which has the library at the lower level that we talked about last week, would be here. And then the bulk of the parking is at the upper level for the upper level part of the building. And we have additional parking at the lower level. The piece I was just talking about that we'll be adding is as close as we can get in this green to the new elevator addition, okay? I want to start with the rectory building. And it's kind of unusual to put a police building into the rectory building. Yep. I'm going to zoom in for a second, in 1 second, but I just wanted to point out from left to right, this is the lower level. This is the grade level that you would enter on the right-hand side, and that's the upper level of the rectory. So I'm going to start in the center. Hey, sorry about that. So you would enter here from the parking lot. You would come to the lobby that I described earlier with the soft interview room and a restroom. You'd come directly to the dispatch window. And that is really how you want to control the public interaction. And nobody gets beyond the secure point unless you're buzzed in, right? The officers would come in from the lower level. There's a new elevator that would be added, and they would have their lockers and support areas down at the lower level. They would come up one level and have report writing and briefing and training room, detectives and lieutenants in that area. This space up here would be a small addition to handle the Sally port and the prisoner processing that I talked about earlier. And then over here on the right-hand side, excuse me, when I zoom in, it is not happy. Okay. And on the right-hand side is the top floor, which is administration spaces. So what I'm showing with this one slide that keeps popping up, that right there, is the extent of the addition to the rectory. Right, there's a small single-car garage where that box is up there, and we have to take it down for what the structure is, but that's where we can add in the prisoner cells and the Sally port, because we want that to be slab on grade. Those prisoner cells are a prefab metal and concrete unit that get dropped into place. And then on the bottom, this bottom arrow is where the elevator would be to connect all 3 floors so we can make this multi-level building accessible. When you enter the building from the parking lot, it's a flat area and you would be able to come straight into the building. Okay, so you recognize, I don't know how well you can see it back there, but I assume you would recognize the school building. And the image that we'll talk about now, the part we'll talk about now, is the L shape, which is the municipal building. Okay, so this is the slide from the library. For those of you that weren't here last week, I'll quickly touch on how we went about that. So we did the same process in terms of talking with the library director and some staff, and visited the library a number of times to get more familiar with it. My office designs dozens of libraries around the state. We know them very well, but every town is unique. So it's really important for us to sit down and talk with your library staff and find out how your library provides services. So what happens here in this part of the building is that the gray area here is an addition that has an elevator and bathrooms and an open courtyard. That happens on both floors, which you'll see in a second. And as we talked about last week, you would enter above from the bottom of the screen, from the main parking lot, or from the left of the screen, from the other parking, or the parking that would be right here in the foreground. You would enter the library right there in the middle, and to the left are the adult spaces, and to the right are the children's and youth spaces. So we would have the quieter areas to the left and the more active areas to the right. As soon as you enter this space, you would hit a welcome point and a technology point and quiet study rooms. A key point of the library is that it has access to this large meeting room. There's a slight different color here. The point of that was that the library, the assigned library space is one half of it, but the room opens up to the full building. It was really just a programming delineation. But the room could be subdivided to have 2 meeting rooms. A neat feature that I really want to point out for those who weren't here before is this courtyard. The children's area surrounds it, and you can enter into this open courtyard where we can have trees and plants. It's about 40 by 40, that courtyard. It's very big. It's kind of a found object, so it's a great outdoor room for the kids. You don't have to worry about them getting away. You can have programs out there. You can have horticultural events, etc. Okay, so this is the upper floor. And what I'm going to talk about are 3 different parts. The first part is the administration bar. So this space here that's in the red box is clerk, finance, administration, and engineering, construction, zoning. There are a few different shades there, and by all means, I know you can't read it from there. I can't read it from here. But that's why Mike has the binders and the CD. You'll be able to dive into it in more detail. But that is the area where the full administration would be, and you would enter it from that same entrance point below from the library. You can come straight in along the side of the building at a level walkway that's covered from the parking area. And there is even a way that you can cut through the building, and we'll talk about that one too in a second. This next box here is basically the council chambers. That can be operated at completely different hours than the rest of the administration bar. Full access to the bathrooms, full access to the egress points, storage, and council work session room. And then the next area is the recreation/community center. So this is kind of neat because it was a bit unexpected when we started to dive into that study. You can see by the amount that I just talked about and the library below, we have this leftover area in a way. And I think when we were first talking about it, Jim, right, that we didn't think we were going to fit that in, but it's a perfect space because if you know that building, right, it's a gymnasium, right? It's a tall, double-high space, so it's perfect for this use, multi-purpose use. It has bathrooms, a separate entrance here, storage areas, etc., egress from the back and from the front. What's really neat about this building is once you enter any of these departments, from the library to the meeting rooms downstairs to the community center, or even there to pay taxes, etc., you don't have to go back outside to get from one to the other. All right, it's one-stop shopping. Once you're in here, any of these spaces, you get to this center link, and you can go down and get to the library and the other meeting room. So it's really a convenient building. It worked out better, and I said this last week, it really worked out better than I think we thought it would. These are renderings, and I hope you can see them from back there. I'll zoom in. Can you see the renderings from back there? No, I see some head shaking. All right, that is just like the photo that we were showing before, except in the center is that link I was talking about. This is a closer view of that link. So what happens is this would be the walkway from above, from the main parking lot, and this is the walkway on the left-hand side at the lower level of the library area. So in the foreground here is where we would be adding some more parking for the seniors to get right into the connection here for not only the library, for all of these other activities. So you'll be right up against the elevator and a side entrance. These two here are just a close-up of the side view from the library entrance at the lower level, and this is a close-up of the upper walkway that has the covered canopy on it. You know, the purpose of this design, and I said it last week too, it's very, very preliminary. All right, this is a vision that the architects had in terms of what it could be. You know, I think we felt our goal was to make it not look like a school, and I think we've done that. And as we develop in terms of what the addition wants to be and how you enter the buildings, the aesthetic will develop as well. Okay. This is my last slide, and hopefully you can see that. I will back it up a few. Okay, so what we tried to do is just to bring this down to the essence of what's important, and I know, as Mike said, others are going to talk in more detail about the numbers. But what we have, if you read from the left-hand side, we have the departments, administration, police, community center, DPW, and the library. The first column represents the existing gross size of those spaces. The second column, option 1, represents what would happen in option 1, right? So administration grows, police grows, community center gets bigger, the DPW gets bigger, the Salt Dome isn't touched, and the library isn't touched either. So they stay the same dimension. So this is option 1, right? Everything on Park Avenue. So police, administration, community center, DPW grow. On option 2, they all grow, right? So administration gets bigger, not as big. Police gets bigger. Community center gets up to the 6,000 mark. DPW grows, and the library gets a bit bigger that we talked about last week. So all of them are growing in option two. Option two, as I described earlier, is primarily about the main site, trying to get all of these facilities there. One of the key points, before I talk about those numbers for a second, is the difference in terms of physically achieving option one and option two. What happens in option one is you need to vacate that property. Administration and police need to get off of that site for essentially 2 years. There's a real big cost involved in doing that. In a recent project in Tenafly, we had the police in trailers, and a big expense, aside from the rental of the trailers, were bringing the utilities to those trailers. We don't even know if that's an option here, maybe at the back of the site or so. We have to look at all of that yet. But if we assume that administration areas are going to find some other offices somewhere in town, some money to fix them up, et cetera, all of that contributes a fair chunk of money, almost 10% of that cost, to the construction budget for that option only. Option two, you don't have that because you would fix up the buildings at the church property and get up and move into them, right? And Mike will talk more about other options. So the bottom line that we have for construction, now that number does not include soft costs, it doesn't include architecture, engineering fees, bonding costs, et cetera. That is really about bricks and mortar, furniture, et cetera, for the building. So option one is $19,500,000 and change. Option two is $20 million and just under $500,000, $20,485,000. They're basically about $1 million apart from each other. What's really interesting about it is the amount of space that you get from option two and the convenience of not being temporarily dislocated, if you will, or relocated for 2 years for the administration and police. So there are a number of pros and cons for each of these, but the option two represents what our initial study was targeting. Right? Okay. Mayor, that's my last slide. That's correct. There's no work on the library in option one. That's correct.
CFO and clerk. Currently, they are in open areas.
Right. That is correct, yep. Every municipal building that I've designed, the clerk and the administrators have private offices. Not big offices, but private offices because of the sensitive material that they might be talking about. Same with HR, et cetera. You know, you always have, you know, it's a place of employment, so there are privacy issues to deal with as well. Instead, in that case, they're all out in an open work area. There's no place to retreat to have that, you know, private conversations. You're welcome. Yes, ma'am. Oh, true. And I, you know, that's something that on our study we didn't really talk about potential revenue side of the benefit of option two, right? Option one, you stay where you are. There's no conversion of a piece of land that doesn't have taxes into a taxable piece of land. So that's for a further conversation. Yes, sir.
The cost of the library, the purchase of the church property, is that included in this, the 20 million?
No, it's not. Again, our focus, our architectural focus was on these particular buildings, not on any other transactions that would be part of the bigger picture, right? So keep in mind that those numbers are not the final numbers. That's the numbers that come from our study.
My question is, are these costs conservative costs? That is, are they
your projections? At the high end, where do they fall?
We try to be toward the high end. The issue we have as architects right now is the graphics we just shown to you is all we have to go by. And our estimators, that's all they have to go by. There are so many assumptions, so there's so many variables in the equation. And as we get to develop the concept further, we can pinpoint and define those variables and get to a more sharper number. So we're hoping that it's higher. You know, we sort of test it from a square foot number back from a breakdown. In the documents that you would have, and they were pointed out last week as well, those numbers are from a voluminous estimate, actually 3 different estimates that comprise those numbers from a third-party estimator, not my office, not Jim's office. All right, so that's something that you know, we want somebody else to look at, so you don't think that we're tailoring a number. It helps protect us too, because so many times people see this and that's the end all, but this is the beginning of something. Those numbers can also come down depending on how we build this, right? So very fluid still.
We have podiums. If you would come up and state your name and ask your question, and please, in the form of a question, about 4 minutes for questions for a person.
Option one. Option one. Can you hear me? Okay. Option one is 18,000 square feet, correct? Excluding the library. Option two is 30,000 square feet.
No, option 1, the administrative part of it is
About 18,000 square
is
feet.
18, right? But that building has the police in it as well, so it's like 30,000 square feet
Less the
And-
library.
without the library, right?
The
So-
library's 12,000 square feet, right?
Right, but option 1, 18,005 is administration,
Okay.
10,009 is the police department. That comprises that one building.
Now, let me ask you, is it cheaper to knock all the buildings down and start from scratch? Do you have a cost estimate of what it would cost to knock everything down?
That's what option 1 is about.
Knocking everything down.
Take them down, relocate for about 2 years while the construction's going on, and put a new building up. All new buildings, right? All new buildings on Park Avenue. Not all. I mean, the DPW stays where it is, the Salt Dome stays where it is, but that building and the community center would be new on Park Avenue site. You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Iovino. I have several questions or needs for more info from you, mainly on the second floor of the municipal new complex, the Little Flower area. And I want to point out, though, that I have no questions on the police station. My opinion is that's the first priority for Berkeley Heights. But on the second floor, as I mentioned a week ago, there's a concept, the library and a community center being used around the country. I think you haven't done justice here by burying the library on the first floor, and I'll refer to it the dungeon so nobody misses my point. And the library in the community center should take up that second floor, which is the parking grade. I don't know why you can't seem to arrange that. I'd like to hear more. And you could have multiple entrances. You'd solve some of the walking distances. And for the municipal people, could be placed on the first floor, I call it the dungeon, because you could enter from the left in the lower level. They don't have 250 visitors a day. They have maybe dozens. So I'm really concerned as to why you can't make better use, get us this complex. You've been around the country. Library, community center, all one, all on the parking level grade, and it would be a beautiful operation. I don't see in your discussion how you can justify it.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's by no means a dungeon. It has 12-foot high ceilings and windows on both ends, all the way down. It's 60 foot wide, which is a little bit narrower than this room, and it has, you know, windows probably from about 3 feet high up to the ceiling. So by no means it's a basement. You know, it's at grade. It's just that the building has 2 levels at grade. Most of the building is at grade at the back end of it. The only part that's at grade at the front is literally the front little piece. So this is really a two-story building where the top floor meets another level. So it's not a basement in any way whatsoever. Now, I remember you got up and spoke last week, and I couldn't really dive into the community center as much as I wanted to because I needed this, right? So this whole area here is about 6,000 square feet of a community center that is literally one flight of stairs from about another 1,500, almost 2,000 square feet of meeting space that are dedicated to the library. So you have everything together in this one building, and not everything can fit on the one floor. I honestly couldn't conveniently put the library up here for floor loading issues, right? That building is built as a school. And somebody else asked this question last week about the library, whether the floor can handle the books. So immediately I put the library at the lower level because the library has to be designed to 150 pounds per square foot floor loading. An office is much lighter at 60 and 100 pounds, depending on what you're using. So that fits into what a school is designed for. So I know I can put administrative offices upstairs by code, and I have to put the library at the lower level. We're just lucky here that the building is above grade the whole time. It's above grade where the library is, and it has wonderful amenities such as the courtyard and the great big meeting room. And they have the benefit of an oversized space in this community center. If they have large events like this, can be held in that room. So I understand what you're saying, and honestly, I thought you'd be tickled with this, the fact that we had the community center in this building.
No, I'm not.
But I understand what you're saying. I wish I could accommodate both.
I am ticklish, but I'm getting older. But I know that you said it's not a dungeon, it's got
Right.
70 feet high. But why can't you provide for the loading? Then you have all that height.
Oh,
You
it-
can
it-
put structures, you can put curved things, you can put columns.
Right, but
did
then
you consider that?
It
I mean,
defeats. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
Yeah.
it defeats the purpose of the move into this building, right? The value of this building is the fact that you're not starting from scratch, right? We're taking the skeleton of the building, and that's our start point, right? We don't have to do foundations, we don't have to do steel and concrete. The skeleton is there, and it's very usable. If that building was in really, really bad shape, the numbers wouldn't work as well. So you have a terrific start point there, and then the rectory building.
But the
the
value to
floor
the
loads.
town is to have a library community center, which is very easy access, and all on one level, close to the parking grade.
Right.
And I don't see why you can't arrange it. It
Right.
looks to me like possibly you could clarify the council chambers. I don't see why that couldn't be dropped down to where you had some seating on the first level. You had the old cafeteria, is what I believe it is. And then that could be the council chambers. Or the council chambers can be used in the community center. You didn't consider that, or did you?
Well, we did, and luckily we had the space to be able to do both. But, I think what you're talking about is ideal. It would be wonderful if we were all on one story, but I think the way it lays out, functionally it works well, but I understand your comments.
Carol, can you tell me what the soft costs are?
Soft costs include architecture fees, engineering fees, civil engineering fees, attorney fees for the process, the town's bonding costs, things like that aren't literal bricks and mortar that go into the building.
What does that amount to?
We don't know what that is just yet because it's still, and we have an estimate that's coming from, thank you.
In your chart of the library, comparing option 1 and option 2, option 2 differed by an increase of around 200 square feet. But in option 2, you have a lot of meeting rooms. So would that be fair to say that there's less stack area and computer areas in option 2 than there is in the current library?
No. What the difference is between option 1 and option 2, option 1, the library doesn't change. So it's the existing building versus the new building for the library. And last week, I stressed the fact that the existing building's inefficient because it's 2 stories. So there's area in there for the stairs, there's area in there for more walls, and the way that building was built, a lot of walls. If the building were to be made accessible, which it should be, it would have an elevator as well. So those are things that take up area that you wouldn't find on a building that's in one floor plate.
did you ever consider an option to add on to the current building?
The current municipal building? No, because there are so many ills in that building in terms of the changes in floor levels that you can't solve for those. You know, you couldn't just flatten things out. You could have a million ramps all over the place, and, you know, a ramp is kind of tricky because there are very specific limits to it. So every inch you go up, you have to come out 1 foot, and then there are limits of how long you can go without a break. So to get up to the stairs to the council chambers, you would probably lose 4 parking spaces and have to reroute all of the police cars in order to get up there. And the effort for somebody to go up that high in a wheelchair up those ramps it's unreasonable.
And I'm just curious, do you know when our new police department position was added?
I don't have that date offhand.
Because I thought that the ADA was in effect at that time, and I'm just curious why the
But the-
building wasn't made ADA
The last thing that
compliant.
was added were the trailers, right? It was just trailers.
But
Thank you.
You know, one follow-up question. On option 1, if the town decides to follow option 1, $19 million, doesn't include the library. Do you have an estimate of what it would cost to bring the library up to code?
No, I don't. No, we didn't evaluate it to that degree. We were asked to focus on the
So if the
municipal
town follows
structures.
option 1, the library is just left as is?
That's right. In terms of municipal dollars, the library would be on its own, basically, to take care of those ills.
And the library doesn't have to be brought up to code then?
The library, like all the other municipal buildings, should be ADA compliant.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Johnson Caglia, 22 Robbins Avenue. Option 1, did you indicate that the 19.5 million included relocation costs?
Yes, it does.
It does, okay. I'm curious how you would, I'm just, from a real standpoint, how would you base that knowing they'd be all over the place? I mean, based on market rentals and so forth?
Right. I mean, all you can do, as I said earlier, you know, we're plugging in variables, right? We know we need to find X square feet for about 2 years. We know we'll have to do minimum fix-up to those spaces. Fair assumption, right? That's all we can do right now is a fair assumption.
All right, of that 19.5, then how much would be in that would be the relocation?
Right. We had, Jim, we had, what, about 1.1 was assigned to that.
Okay, and when the auditor comes up, I'd like to know if that you could bond for that. I doubt you can bond for that. My second question is, in option 1, you know, you've increased the existing square footage of the municipal complex. In doing that, what happens to the existing parking? Are you going to be reducing that?
Yeah, it all gets reconfigured, and I think there's a net reduction. The building that would be built in the similar footprint would be a 2-story building, so that we can try and minimize that. But there wouldn't be a dramatic reduction. So we're going to be just about the same as what Jim is telling me, maybe even above, depending on the handicap spots, et cetera, that we put there.
Okay, and the other question I have is, could you explain what's going to take place over at the sewer plant with DPW and what'll take place at the new municipal complex?
Sure.
Under option 2.
Right, option 2, right.
Yeah.
Right, as I said earlier, what happens over by the sewage treatment plant are the seasonal items for the DPW, basically the longer-term storage items. So truck bays would hold equipment that they wouldn't need for, you know, snow removal. All the plows would be in there. The salt dome is there, et cetera. And seasonally, they would switch out equipment and bring it to the active site on the main campus. And then so for the DPW on the main campus, we would have a greater number of bays toward the industrial side of the property, and that would be, and the police impound would be there as well.
Okay, and under either option, or particularly option 1, does that include
Right.
the recreation office building in the back there?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Under option 1, does that include moving the recreation building into the new complex?
No, it'll have its own structure. On the one site plan, we had a separate 6,000 square foot community center.
Oh, that'll, and the
That's
recreation
new as
office,
well.
the recreation office would be part of that.
That's right.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Art Joel, 41 Shady Road Lane. I have a question. Could you please explain again why the cost to acquire the church property and the library to the church is not included in column 2?
Sure, because that's coming, and the next presenter is going to talk about that more. We were talking about the architect. Well,
shouldn't it be in that number?
the only thing we can evaluate professionally are the construction costs. None of the
Construction
transaction
needs the
issues are
property
part
to
of that
build.
math right now.
Don't you need the property to build it in order to consider that?
Sure, and that's what's coming right after this.
Then the
when
number
I'm done.
should be there.
It's coming. It'll be here in 1 minute.
But
Jess Jermansky, 30 Lawrence Drive. So this is kind of a continuation of that same question. I just wanted, for clarification, understand what's in option 2. So does that not include the need for the library to relocate?
That's right.
I'm sorry, during the transition time.
That's correct. Those numbers do not include the need for the library, the cost for the library to relocate. At the last meeting, I think we talked about that a bit. That the library.
Yes, we did. I'm just trying to figure out whether
Yep.
that what's in the number
That's correct.
that's in front of me right now.
Right. What you asked is correct.
Okay.
Is not
Thank
in
you.
that number.
Tom Forager, 14 Dorset Road. Did you look at the possibility of just putting a new municipal complex on another piece of property?
What he asked, I'm sorry, they couldn't hear you. He asked if we looked at putting the municipal complex on a completely different property, right?
Right.
No, we didn't. We were asked in our study to evaluate the ideal need and how that would fit within the Church of the Little Flower property.
And are we going to get, before we leave, a bottom line cost for option 1 and option 2 total?
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
everything included?
Yes.
Paul Farraguna, 175 Park Avenue. In option 1, you say there would be no new library, and I'm just wondering why. It seems like it's all or nothing.
Well, I think the exercise here was from the municipal perspective, right, and trying to solve for that. The library only really comes into play when the transaction happens, right? The library needs to vacate because of the transaction. And then that forced us architecturally to explore also then how the library could fit into the school building. So
So are you saying if option 1 was selected, that would mean that the land swap would not have occurred?
That's correct, right. That's
Okay.
right.
Well, but I can think of any number of other options. I mean, you know, it's not just 2. I can think of any number of other permutations, you know, and using the land swap. I mean, just one that comes to mind, and I'm not saying that it's preferred or anything, but just one that comes to mind is move the DPW as you suggest and use that space from the old DPW for a new police station. That's just one thought that comes to mind. So, it just seems like there's only 2 options, and it's like either or, it's all or nothing.
But the DPW as a whole couldn't move to the sewage treatment plant, and that would be a real burden to that site to do something like that. The only way that would work is if we were able to bring the DPW to the church campus. So, you know, yes, if the DPW wasn't on the Park Avenue site, we'd have tons of options, but we need a place to put the DPW, and the treatment plant is not an option for the full DPW.
Okay.
You're welcome. Yes, ma'am.
For many years, the seniors have been promised their own space. I'm asking you, Anthony, where is their space in this building?
Terrific. You actually have 2 excellent spaces to use. All right, so this first one, the community center is, I said earlier, 6,000 square feet. That giant room there is probably about 3,000 or so? 3,000 square feet. Sorry, okay. And then also downstairs, downstairs at the library, I pointed out earlier that you have this area here, which is probably just under 2,000 square feet. You know, we show it with tables. We have to show it how it would be occupied. But so you have two spaces that they aren't assigned or labeled seniors, but they're for the whole community. But what's great about it is that you have such flexibility in this building because the library itself has separate meeting spaces. Then you have these two rooms. It's not one room. It can be open to one room, but it's two rooms. So that's three different reasonable size spaces. And then upstairs, you have the community room, right, and the council chamber. So you have 5 big spaces to meet in. So it wasn't necessary then to just label and dedicate it to one use. That I think the policy, if you will, is that everybody gets to use it so they can serve everybody. So, you know, you're talking about as a label on a room. I think there's no shortage of spaces, which is terrific, where you can have, you really need a program director for this, where you can say, okay, in the upper room, every Tuesday afternoon is this event for the seniors, right? And every Wednesday afternoon is this for the library. So there are enough spaces now where you can have that program management where everybody can use it without hesitation. So I think it solves for what you're looking for, but there isn't a permanent label on one room. Sure. Okay. All right. So I hear you. I understand your perspective. I think you're covered, but I'm going to go on to the next question so we can get to the other presenters tonight. Okay. I think.
Richard Leister, 49 Summit Avenue. Just asking about impervious surface. I'm hearing in option 2 there's going to be an increase in impervious surface. Are you compensating for stormwater runoff? And if those costs are included in your estimate?
They are included in the estimate. The state dictates how we have to deal with the runoff. So on any commercial property and residential properties over a certain size, the state dictates how you deal with runoff. What he asked about is impervious surface. That's like asphalt and concrete where the water can't get through it. So the state is great about that. It's one of the more progressive in the country in terms of keeping you from dumping your rainwater onto your neighbor's property and causing flooding conditions. So there'll be water management issues. We have to because it's a state mandated requirement.
Yes, Maggie Gonzalez, 31 Shady Grove Lane. Following up with the water runoff issues, if you move some of the DPW back to the sewer plant, have you studied the additional flooding problems? That area does tend to flood regularly.
No, we haven't studied it to that level. This is very preliminary still.
And what about possible contamination of the area from additional DPW trucks?
Well, again, the state and the building codes are very specific about that. Those truck bays have oil separators at the mouth of each bay. So anything like, you know, a truck comes in the winter full of snow, it melts, it drips out, and it drips to the drain. The drains have oil separators, which is great. I can tell you only a few years ago it wasn't mandated. So the state's very particular about DPW facilities and how trucks get washed, et cetera, things like that. That's not happening at that site. It's very passive, but you're right. You know, you bring equipment in, you have to be careful about where any oil and gas drips go, but it's covered by how the building would be designed and the oil would be collected.
And is the current DPW site, is that contaminant-free?
I don't know that answer. So, right.
My concern is if you vacate the current DPW site, will that be usable if there's possible contamination from fuel runoff at that site?
Yes. Yeah, in fact, I'm in proposal right now for a town in Bergen County, Moonachie, where the site has to be capped first, and then they're putting a DPW facility on top of it. So the state has the means to use any site that has a certain level of contamination on it. If that's the case, then that goes into the equation.
Well, if the current site is already contaminated, perhaps we would be best served just to leave the DPW in the current site. And if other facilities were moved out, perhaps you'd have enough room to leave the DPW in the current site and save a lot on those cleanup costs.
Well, it's certainly something we'll be looking at, again, because we're at such an early stage in this process right now. But
thank you.
Thank you.
Art Joel again, 41 Shady Grove Lane. Are you aware that in the past the gas tank at the DPW site had ruptured and was replaced, so nothing was done at that time to remediate that, so it's a known fact that that's a bad site. I said, are you aware of that? No, he answered the question to the young lady over there. I'm aware that that tank broke and was replaced.
Herb Horwath, Shady Grove Lane. Mr. Iovino, where are the fuel tanks going to be put in option number 2?
They are at the main campus, not by the sewage treatment plant.
Okay. And recycling?
That's by the sewage treatment plant.
All right. How much traffic in option number 2 would there be at the Snyder Avenue site?
Well, we haven't studied traffic counts on it just yet.
Noise, anything like that? You say that you have a 90-foot buffer zone.
That's correct.
We live across the street from the other neighbors that just came up and spoke. The Walgreens is behind us, and I can't tell you how many times the garbage trucks at 6:30 in the morning, bang, bang, bang. We're going to get noise all weekend.
But that's not the
DPW.
intent. As I'm sorry to interject, but that's not the intent of the layout that was there. Again, I said earlier that it's seasonal vehicles, so it's not daily trips of this equipment coming in and out of those garages. It's the recycling center is pedestrian, resident traffic, probably primarily on the weekends, but day to day, it isn't there. Garbage trucks at 6 in the morning is not there at that facility. That's not what it would be used for.
So as far as recycling, what would be over there if the recycling center was there?
Bins for people to drop off, and when it's collected
Okay.
to a certain
Odors,
point, it gets
noise.
carted
We've already
away.
got the sewage treatment plant there. Do we need more stench? There's
No,
a fence behind my
recycling
neighbors that
center
hasn't been
isn't
maintained
food.
for years.
Right. You're
So
talking
how
about
do I know this
plastics,
is going to
metals,
be
papers, so.
maintained?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
There's a fence behind the neighbor's property
Yep.
that hasn't been maintained for the sewage treatment plant. And so how do I have a guarantee that anything's going to be maintained here?
Well,
and the
that-
salt dome with the runoff going into the river.
I think the intent here is to have this buffer between the two, and if that's an issue that we need to know about, that's something I wouldn't hear because that's not the comment I would receive, but that would simply be part of whatever the improvement is. I think the council, if I can speak for them, I know from the conversations, is concerned about the impact to any of the residents on any site. Park Avenue, the main campus, the treatment plant. And if we can make the buildings, these passive buildings, become even more of a buffer to the treatment plant, then it's a win-win. And that's what we need to look at. It's so early in this process, so we haven't pinpointed exactly what piece of material is going there and activity, but they're really good concerns. It's the stuff we need to hear.
And again, the only thing I will follow up on is, I'll reiterate for Mrs. Gonzalez, is the situation over at the existing DPW with the fuel. There is oil recycling tank. I personally, township residents are allowed to bring their used motor oil there. Doesn't exactly look to be the cleanest site to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Linda Rudicelli, 33 Dell Lane. Plan 1 and Plan 2, you're only showing a difference of about $1 million. But you talked about other expenses. I missed a couple of them, one of them being the purchase of the church. It was another $2.85 million.
I didn't say that. I didn't talk about the purchase of the church. The only numbers I've talked about have been about the construction. I said earlier that the presenters, after I'm finished here, will talk about those numbers.
Does that Plan number 2 include the purchase of the church? And you said no.
No, I didn't. Plan number 2 requires the transaction, but the numbers don't show on the slide that I had up. I'm only talking about the physical activity, the construction activity. So as soon as we're done, the next presenter will talk about that.
So that's not a. So in other words, you have to add another $3 million to purchase the church.
That's exactly what we're going to talk about as soon as we can wrap this section up.
So there's more addition. That's what I'm getting at. There's more to the $20 million. So have we talked about, can we afford this as taxpayers? What it's going to take to run that facility?
It's coming.
Excuse me, I'm about to just show you the slide. If you give me 2 minutes.
Okay.
It's literally the next slide that I'm going to show you.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay.
And it includes all those items. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. They made it taller for everybody but me. Margaret Ellis. I'm on 102 Twin Falls Road. Just to go back to what the woman said about the senior center and John Bonacci was talking about previously with the notion of the library or the combined use. I've been involved in Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts for more than 10 years in this town, and getting meeting space is, it's beyond difficult. So also my children have been to the rec center for classes and things. Right now the rec center is divided into sections, and though it's not an ideal space, you can actually run 2 to 3 activities right now concurrently in the rec center, and I don't really understand how that's going to be accomplished in a gymnasium. So the meeting rooms downstairs for the library are really nice, but they tend, from at least, you know, my eyes, they seem to be a little on the large side. And there is no dedicated space for something like the seniors or for classroom type activities, something that you could bring, you know, a group of Girl Scouts or Cub Scouts to do an activity. So if we say that this is a community center, that doesn't feel like a community center to me. It feels like a gym.
Well, that room, which, you know, again, at this level of graphic, you're not showing what could happen in there in terms of furniture and divisions, et cetera. Any architecturally, any space, something as tall as this can be divided. There are means to do that. So that big space could absolutely be divided in half or in quarters. The space downstairs that I was talking about could be subdivided further. It all depends on programmatically what we need, so we're not spending the money on expensive dividers and they never get used. So we'll look into it further, but that's really important for us to hear, is to talk to different community groups and how they would use these spaces and what's available to them. But thank you. A couple more?
I'll be quick. I'm Rachel Metta, 83 Dogwood Lane. With the larger square footage, and I'm all for option 2, I know it's going to cost more to heat and cool and electrify the space. Has there been thought given to how we're going to green it? Are we going to put solar panels on that big roof and offset the extra energy and expenses?
Right. The conversations we had so far haven't been specifically about solar panels or geothermal or any particular thing. We know that we want to strive to make it green. We won't necessarily be LEED certified. That's for more discussion in terms of how it impacts the costs. But you can absolutely be green without spending a bunch of money initially, right? So solar panels are perhaps the most expensive thing to do unless you have a deal with somebody where they're paying for it and you're collecting the benefit from it over the long term. So those are things we absolutely will be looking at. It's just premature right now. Thank you.
Tom Linehan, 231 Lorraine Drive. As far as the DPW space, the current location is next to City Hall is furthest away from the train station, has very little road frontage, probably the least valuable part of the whole development over there. If we keep that, do we have enough room there to put all those garages that you've spoke at the sewage plant and over at the Little Flower, so that we're not involved with a cleanup that's expensive, that's probably going to cost, and not we're going to get as much money on that section, since that's a separate tax lot. That's feasible. Any thoughts to that?
That's option one. That's option one is expanding the DPW on the current site.
On the current side, all those buildings?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we had shown.
One more quick question. Any thoughts about solar panels on the roofs?
Yeah, well, we were
Okay.
just talking about it's
All right.
premature right now.
All right, thank you.
If we could have maybe just the last question so we
Sure.
can get on to the other presenters.
This will be speedy. Nancy Ambolzano, 215 Killarney Drive. I totally understand the scope of work you had, and this might be a little helping me to understand what role or who owns the library. But we are kind of looking at apples to oranges, it sounds like, because it sounds like the work we have to do in option one, we'd also, as a community, assuming that we're responsible for the library, we would still have to do some of that work. And I think anyone who lives in this community, myself included, that library is not adequate in today's world. I know as someone who used libraries my entire life, living here for the last 15 years, barely have used it. Didn't use it with my kids because it was not kid-friendly. It's not a welcoming environment. It wasn't big enough, and it's not utilized as much as a library should be utilized as a community space. So putting that aside, though, we'd still have to do all those upgrades, the ADA work. So I think I understand it wasn't in your scope, and I know it costs more money to do that work, but if this becomes a question of 1A versus B or 1 versus 2, I think we have to add that to the cost to show that 2 probably isn't going to cost that much more, and we're going to end up with a much better facility than option 1.
Thank you. Mayor?
Need your help on the next slide. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 3 slides. I'm going to try and answer your questions regarding the overall budget, and then I'm going to hand it off to the auditors, the township auditors, and allow them to decipher these numbers and explain to you what they mean. A number of questions was, what about all the other costs? The next slide, the first slide that I show you is final projected budget option 1. The same number that we carried from the last screen, the 19.537 million, has been carried over, and we've added the soft costs, estimated 20% of the total construction costs, which works out to $3.9 million. What is the soft costs? Legal, engineering, architecture, planning, and accounting costs. 20% is a fair amount. Generally, you may want to use a number closer to 15%. However, 20% provides that extra cushion, make sure that we cover everything. So your total, the grand total project cost under option 1 turns out to be $23,444,000. And as you can see in the slide, there's no proceeds from the sale of the municipal complex, 0. There's no cost of purchasing the Little Flower campus property. And as we've mentioned before, there's no improvements to the library, and whether or not that should be added on or considered by the municipality, that would only increase this overall number. And we do have, there's questions about the environmental cleanup. Under option 1, we would knock everything down and reconstruct on the Park Avenue site. And although I don't remember it off the top of my head, when you get the binders, you can go through the detailed construction cost estimates. And we did assign a number for the environmental cleanup under option 1, because if we do option 1, the township then becomes responsible for all environmental cleanup costs and meeting code. Just the fact that you had a spill so many years ago and nobody's cleaned it up doesn't mean it goes away. We're still responsible for it. So if we go with option 1, we're going to get into site remediation costs and cleaning up everything and bringing everything up to standards today. We do have, I don't remember what the number is off the top of my head, but we did plug in a number because, again, if you're going to take down everything on option 1, You're going to find asbestos in there down in the basement. We know that. There's a gas leak or a gas spill in the back. That's going to have to be cleaned up. So, and as you all know, when you get into those type of numbers for environmental cleanup, it's hard to give you an exact number. You have to do quite a number of studies, but we do have a number that we did plug in. And you could see that when you pick this up. When you get your binders, you're not going to be limited to these numbers. You're going to get very detailed construction cost estimates, so you'll be able to see how these numbers came about. If I can go to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. Option 2. Option 2 is a little bit more interesting here. A lot more numbers to talk about. Again, the top number, total estimated construction cost, $20,486,000. Underneath there, the next line, soft costs, again, 20% of the total construction cost, $4 million. That brings us our grand total project cost of $24,583,000. Then, you've heard in your first meeting that we had, even though it's just a MOU at this time, the purchase price of the Little Flower campus turned out to be $2.845 million. So we have to add that number in there. You get a subtotal of $27,428,000. Now the next two numbers, I just want to be real clear. These are very preliminary numbers. This is not set in stone. However, it would be unfair to have this conversation with you without plugging in a realistic number, at least to start the conversation with. And that's what we did here. If we move to the Church of Little Flower campus, we're going to sell the property that we're on right now. We came up with a number of $3.8 million. How did we come up with that? If you give me a minute, I'm going to show you one more slide and I'm going to walk you through that. And I just want to be real clear on that. That $3.8 million that I assigned, or I worked on assigning that number with the municipal tax assessor, it's a very, very preliminary number. That number can go in many, many different directions. So I just want to be real clear about that. And then the next number that we have is less the estimated millage that we may be able to use from the library in order to assist in the reconstruction of the new library over at the Church of Little Flower campus. We came up with $240,000. Very preliminary number. Nothing is set in stone. We don't have anything agreed to on the MOUs, but again, the library would be closed for an estimated 18 months, and that number has not, it's not in writing or anything like that, so I just want to be real clear about that. However, it would be unfair to have this conversation, again, without plugging in what we believe is a good place to start. That brings the net project cost down to $23,305 for option 2. Option 1, if you remember, was $23,444. So they're very close, about $140,000 difference. However, as we talked about, option 1, you get no upgrades on the library, which is a pretty significant improvement for the township. What you also don't see under option 2, which I'm going to get into in much more detail at the next meeting, because we're going to focus on the existing complex if we were to sell it, and we're going to do a discussion on what a redevelopment plan is and what the vision for that property may be. But what you don't see under option 2 is the annual estimated municipal revenue that would be generated. We did plug in a number for the estimated proceeds of the sale, but what's not shown on here is the estimated revenue. We're going to go more into that next week. Now, how did I get this number under option 2 of if we were to sell the complex for $3.883 million? Next week's meeting is set aside just to talk about the redevelopment plan and what could potentially go at the municipal complex. One very preliminary idea, and I got to stress again, preliminary, would be a mixed residential housing development with some commuter parking assigned to it. So we're going to spend next meeting on that, but in order to provide you with a budget for tonight's meeting, we had to plug in some numbers again. And what we came up with was a development that, what would be a mixed-use residential development? A mixture of townhouses and apartments. Whether the apartments are for sale, whether the apartments are rental, hasn't been decided yet. Again, nothing has been set in stone. And we had a 10% set aside of affordable housing units, which came out to 13. We worked on, we gave this information to the town tax assessor. You add up the top three, the total came out to an assessed value of $38,800,000. The equalized ratio indicated the assessed value was 21 million. The tax rate produced a tax revenue of approximately $833,000 annually to the township. Again, I don't want to get caught up on that one slide that you see in front of you tonight, because next week on Monday, we're going to spend the entire evening on the redevelopment plan and options for the municipal complex. But in order to be fair to go through this exercise, we had to at least come to a starting point. So those are the numbers, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce to you the township auditors, and they're going to answer your questions. What does that mean to the taxpayers of the township? What's the tax impact and so forth? They're going to go into details about bonding, numbers, finances, stuff that I'm not, it's just not my area, so I'm not even going to try to touch it. And I'm going to introduce the township auditors now and have them come forward, and they're going to go through some more slides and go into a little bit more depth of these. So I'm going to start with Mike McGuire. And you want me to put your first slide up?
My name is Mike McGuire. I'm a partner with Samuel Klein, the auditors for the township. With me is another partner, Joe Falcone. We were asked to evaluate the tax impact on the numbers that were provided to us by the planner and the assessor. So my first slide here, you'll see the projected budget for option one. I have $23,900,000. That is combination of the project cost of $23,444,000 plus closing costs from the bond sale, which I estimated around $450,000. It's the underwriter's costs and printing costs and things of that nature. And on the second option, I'll go through this sheet first and I'll go on to the breakdown of the other options. Under option two, the projected budget, again, I have $24 million, which is the projected budget that was provided to us, plus another $450,000 or so in closing costs. From that, I reduced it by the library contribution or the millage to get down to a project cost that we're going to bond for of $23,760,000. Also included in this calculation, which you have to keep in mind, is that the 2014 assessed value of the township is $1,763,000 and change. By using option two, that would be increased by the $21 million by selling the land that the complex is currently on. So that would increase the assessed value to $1,785,000 and change. That number we need to use is when we calculate the tax rate going forward. Yeah, I know it's small, and this will be part of the package that you get on the disc tomorrow from the clerk's office. I'll try to go through this. I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to try to go through this, and I do apologize that it is so small. I tried to get all the information on one sheet. What we did was we projected out option one over a 20 or 25-year life for bonding purposes. And then we also came up with different amortization schedules based on what the current debt is to try to give the council an idea of what the cost would be. So on option one, I have big letter A here. What we did was we started out with the municipal tax rate. We increased it by the debt service, which would be a level debt service for the most part. We have the revised tax rate, what the current municipal tax rate is, just the municipal share, and the tax rate, just the municipal share, including the project. And what we did was we came up with, again, various scenarios, but long and short of it is that you have a range of, say, $302 to $354 per year increase by using the 20-year. And on the 25-year, it would be $267 to $312 as an increase. And this would be starting in year 2019. This wouldn't be right off the bat. The first 3 years, they would sell temporary notes to finance the construction. And then after that, we would go to permanent financing. The construction, the interest on the notes, the impact would be minimal, anywhere between $15 and $50 per year. But what we would do is we'd start off at $10 million and then $20 million and then $25 million, or whatever the final number would be for the construction. And then we would permanently finance. And that would be for option one. Well, yeah, okay. I don't know if you can see it up here, but you have from A, B, C, and D. Again, that was the different amortization schedules that we used to come up with the interest rate and the cost. Option A would be level principal, would be the same amount pretty much every year that you would have to pay back the principal. And it goes from there to a scenario where we try to wrap the principal around the current existing debt. So we try to lower the interest cost the first year so that there's not a big spike. And then when the current debt gets depleted or is paid off, then we increase the cost or increase the principal payments back to a level so it stays fairly level. If it's, say, $1.7 million in total, and I'm just going to use a number off the top of my head, throughout this, we try to keep it around that same level so that there's no big spikes. With a level principal, you may have a tax rate that is higher, and then as the current debt gets paid off, you'll see a big drop in taxes. So we try to keep it level. Even when we do the other scenarios, we try to wrap it around the existing debt. So for the taxpayers, there's no big spikes. Yeah, and then for this, we currently use 3.5% for interest costs. And it was, the interest that we used was stable throughout the entire issue. Sure. Go ahead.
My takeaway from this page is that if we were to consider option one, where the township is going to reconstruct a new facility on the existing footprint, where the swap does not take place, and it does not involve the library at all, if we were to finance the net cost of the project over 25 years, it would affect the average resident to the tune of about $280 or $285 a year additional on their tax bill. Is that a safe assumption?
Yes, I mean, there's a range based on the amortization scenario, but that's probably the middle ground.
But in broad strokes,
yes.
A representative conclusion would be that.
Correct.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
Are there any other observations which you think are key, which should be takeaway points as it relates to option one and the impact on the resident?
Well, the key factor is that in option one, there would be no increase in ratables. So basically, you're financing the construction of a new property with no increase in tax ratables. So, you know, the cost would be higher, obviously, and I'll demonstrate that, than in option two. Because with option two, you have the increase in the ratables, which basically takes the cost and spreads it out over a larger tax base.
Okay, so in other words, the the redevelopment or the new development on the Park Avenue property would all become taxpayers and they would all participate in the financing of this debt. is what
Well,
you're saying.
yeah, because basically, I mean, if the scenario that Mike had talked about where they put townhouses in mixed use, then that would increase those tax dollars or that increase in the ratables would then be spread to the 1.763 million. And then that's how your tax rate is calculated by that number.
All right, thank you very much.
No. And that's even smaller. Okay. Now this is option 2. And again, we use the same thought process when figuring these numbers. Again, the only difference on this is that in calculating the tax rate, including the budget, we had to increase the assessed value from $1,763,000 to $1,785,000. So you can see with option 2, the 20 years, and then option 2, the 25 years, that we're looking at a range of, $223,000, I'm sorry, to $280, and then on the 25-year from 280 to 246, using round numbers. And that would be on the, I'm sorry, the 25-year, I'll go through it from the beginning. The range for option 2 for 20-year amortization would be from $280 to $324 per year. And for the 25-year amortization on option 2, it would be from $246 to $280. And again, these are using the construction costs that were provided to us, and we basically just tried to determine what the tax impact would be.
Before we pass the baton to the residents to ask their questions, I have 1 second, please. I'm sorry, I'll hold my question for a minute. Sorry.
I just have to go back to something you said at the beginning. Again, I'm not great on this, but you said that we would be getting $833,000 per year revenue from the condos and the housing that would go there, right? Yeah, the 833. That's total, or is that what the township's percentage is?
No, that's the total. That's the total based on the total tax rate. So that has to get allocated between the school, the county, and the local. Okay? It's not. The local would be about $142,000.
Okay, so it's about 15% of that. And you said it was 142,000.
About 142,000.
Okay, thank you.
My question relates to the tax revenue which would be derived from the theoretical new buildings on Park Avenue, where you're showing a cash flow of $833,000.
That's the assessor showing the cash
No,
flow.
let's assume for a moment that is in the ballpark. To what degree should we consider that as it relates to handling the debt service? So we're issuing bonds for 25 years. There's a coupon payment. And we also have to pay back the principal. So before you're talking about the amortization of the bond, and that's sort of talking about how do we pay back the principal, which is a separate issue than how do we pay the coupon on the bond during the life of the bond.
The debt service that we have in these schedules includes both principal and interest. The
Right.
interest was computed at 3.5%, which in today's market is probably higher than what the actual market would come in if we were to sell the bonds in the present market. Just like with the interest on the notes that Mike talked about for the first 3 years, we used 1% interest on the notes. We've been seeing interest rates at 0.5%, and I think Mike, your CFO, is telling us you got a note sale tomorrow. So we'll know better tomorrow exactly what.
Yeah, where the market is
what we
is
can
that for now.
anticipate for notes, or interest on notes. And just to clarify the $833,000, the $833,000 is what the revenue would bring in if that was just the only piece of property in town. But you got to sort of disregard that revenue and just take the increase in the values in the ratables to increase your tax, your net valuation taxable base. And that's why you get a lower tax rate because the base is now higher. And again, if you were to take that $833,000 and allocate it between the county, the school, and the local, you're talking, like I said, $142,000 to the town, and that's less than a penny because every $176,000 on the increase in appropriations or increase in revenues or appropriations that's what it's worth, $176,000.
Right. So in other words, if I could sort of repeat that back to you so I understand it, even though, I mean, receiving $800,000 is great because that's $800,000 more than we're getting now, the real benefit of the town, it takes the form of the increased rateable, the tax value of that property, not necessarily just the cash flow associated with the taxing of that property.
Correct.
All right, thank you very
If I can
much.
just interject too, I know one of the gentlemen before had a question regarding the relocation course. In our opinion, it's probably not a bondable item, but that would have to be referred to bond counsel, and he would tell us whether all, part, or none of it is included within the bondable amounts.
To the public, you're welcome to ask your questions.
Hi, Art Scholl, 41 Shady Grove Lane, Berkeley Heights. Could you please explain tax rate? I mean, how does that apply to homeowners that have property values of different values? Is it that?
If you look at the, I don't have the chart.
You gave a number, but that's for
Okay.
everyone. But
The 2014 budget had a tax levy of $11,595,000.
no, I'm talking about cost to the taxpayer.
Yeah, I'm trying to get there. The tax levy is what the cost to the taxpayer is.
Okay.
The tax levy for 2014 was approximately $11,595,000. You take that $11,595,000 and divide that by the net valuation taxable, that gives you a tax rate. Multiply that tax rate times the assessed value of your property, and that gives you what your taxes are for local purposes.
So the numbers you're throwing out, if my house is worth, say, $500,000, it's 5 times that rate?
5 times that rate.
Okay,
If you
it's
look at
not
the
just that
example,
number.
When you see the handout, the average residential property in Berkeley Heights is $308,100. Okay?
That's the number we used for this. I didn't clarify that, but we used $308,100 as the average assessment. So when you see these calculations, it's based on that number.
And based on that number there, last year's tax rate of 0.658 for municipal purposes only would give the average home a tax bill of $2,027.
Okay.
Based on one of the schedules that we have, the equal principal payments, the tax rate would go to $763, or the tax bill would go to $2,350,000, for a total of $323. That's based on a 20-year schedule.
All right, considering the plans are going to go ahead, what kind of contingencies or factors are applied to your estimates? What could we apply? Plus or minus?
Well,
These are based on the construction cost that we provided. Again, that's all preliminary as it is right now, so we're just providing,
All right.
we're providing preliminary numbers.
And don't forget, we also increased the soft cost by $400,000 or $500,000 in each of these scenarios, so there's a cushion there
That
of
could be high or low,
$500,000.
though.
Pardon?
That could be low.
It could be lower,
As well as
absolutely.
high.
These are very conservative numbers on it, and they're on the high side. So if anything, when the true numbers come in, they should be
All
probably
right,
go
then I have
down.
one major general question. How can we go so far with numbers when we're working on plans that have not been legally approved. We don't know if they're environmentally sound. We don't know a lot about the plans, but we can go this far with numbers.
Well, that's not for us to answer.
I know,
We're
but
just
it's a
giving you-
general question.
We're just giving you the basis of what.
Can anyone answer
what
that?
we're told as to what that would produce as far as your taxes are concerned.
Yeah, I can answer that. It's based on what we know right now. We made this presentation based on what we know right now with the estimates we have right now. The only thing that's fixed cost in there is what we're going to do in the swap between the church and ourselves. We know what the difference in the valuation is. Everything else is right now a plan. It could change. I think everybody was presented so far.
Have you done any environmental impact studies to say that your plan is feasible?
Not to my knowledge as yet.
So how do we go this far without doing something like that? Something
We
to
have
walk
to
in
start someplace, Mr. Shaw. We've started.
at the beginning, and that's the beginning.
It's not, well, in your opinion. Thank you very much.
All right, my experience has been,
In your opinion. Thank you very
I
much.
can
Next
talk about
question.
that.
Thank you very much.
I'm done with my
Next question.
Hold on, before I do that, I just want to clarify one thing too, that the rates that we're talking about, the assessed value, is not the market rate. That's the assessed value of the property for tax purposes. If anybody's trying to figure out what their house is worth, the market value, you have to take the ratio of 55.9% and multiply it times that to come out with what your estimated assessed value is. And then you could do the calculations if you're trying to do it at home or in your head. I don't want anybody to be confused with market value. Your house may be worth X amount of dollars, but for tax purposes, the assessed value is a different number. I just want to clarify that. I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
All right. Jess Jermansky, 30 Lawrence Drive. So the redevelopment that you're basing the numbers on here, I've got two questions about it. The first is any concern about the cleanup costs would come out of, that's outside of the dollars that...
We didn't look, we weren't provided with the breakdown of what those costs were. We were just provided with a net cost, or a gross cost, I should say, of what the projects were, and to try to determine a preliminary tax rate for the debt that would be incurred. And that was really the extent of our...
So at this point, it's just an
Well,
unknown? It's just an unknown?
I would have no idea. I mean, I don't know if somebody else could answer, but I have no idea.
I'll just jump in there real quick. Next week, we're going to talk about the redevelopment plan. We're going to get more into that. But when you write a redevelopment plan, what the municipality has the option of doing is making it a requirement of the redevelopment plan and subsequent redevelopment agreements entered into with the redeveloper that they would become responsible for all cleanup costs. And usually that's standard not standard, but it's very common language in a redevelopment plan. There are always clauses in there. There's always a clause in there that if there's a unforeseen condition or something, however, we'll make it aware to the developer that yes, we're along New Jersey Transit tracks. That's a red flag right there. Every site I've worked on along railroad tracks, you're going to have minor cleanup along the tracks. It's going to be in the soil. It's definite. We've heard about potential gas leak or so forth. I've heard about that, but there hasn't been a detailed study on that. But we will make this. We've done an Oprah request ourselves of all of the environmental records that are on file down with the DEP. They have all been drawn in and incorporated into the redevelopment plan. We want to be right out in front with the developers saying, listen, this is everything that we know about the property, okay? Every leak or every potential contaminant that's on that property, and we're asking you, developer, when you submit your RFPs, and I'm getting ahead of myself to next week, we want you to pay for all of those costs, and you're going to incorporate that into your price that you're going to give to the township. But I will go into that in detail next week
So if you've considered those things, then essentially what we know now estimate of proceeds from that sale is under the market consideration of those
correct,
conditions.
with the caveat that there's always no lender is going to allow any developer to walk in there and says, I've got this, don't worry about it. Nobody would ever do that.
Right.
However, we do make the expectation to the redeveloper that you're going to clean this up to residential standards, and that's even a higher level. If we put a residential use on this, there's two different standards, Site Remediation Act, non-residential and residential. But depending on which way the redevelopment plan goes, if we ask somebody or propose a residential use there, the developer is going to be responsible to clean up the property to residential standards.
So
And to
this,
answer- I'm sorry, go ahead.
this is a good segue to the second question that I had, which is what I'm seeing here is residential development as opposed to business development. Perhaps this is also moving forward to next week, but is the expectation now that the council is going to be recommending or that the zoning would be residential?
You
And
know
has
what,
there been any consideration that it would be retail or other business use?
We're getting one meeting ahead. And next week is, I'm not trying to avoid the questions, and I know I went through those slides quickly because I really wanted to get to the auditors and the impact to the taxpayer. Next week's meeting is strictly on redevelopment. Now we move back to the municipal complex site. What can go there? What density? What would it look like? Cleanup, environmental, wetlands, buffers. Well, we could, that's next week's presentation. So if you just hold some of those thoughts, I understand, and nobody's saying it's 100% residential, but I had to, in order to produce this exercise for you tonight, we had to at least plug something in. So that's where we are.
Thank you.
John Bonacci, 156 Gallinson. First, I want to say these average resident tax rate, I've never been in favor of, and judging by many people talking to me, it seems like it always costs us more. Nonetheless, I'd rather see you teach people how to multiply the ratio of the tax rate to the existing one and their current assessment. Now, I want to get close to what Mr. Hall, I think, was addressing, Councilman Hall. The debt service. As many of us know, the debt service, annual debt service, is over and above the 2% property tax cap, over and above. Now, I'll just throw out the number for you. If you borrow 25 million for 20 to 25 years, it would seem like that could cost us $2 million a year.
Right.
And if we look,
on the 2%.
okay.
If I can interrupt you for one
well,
second.
wait, let me finish the question. So if it costs us $2 million a year in debt service over and above the 2% property tax cap, wherever that goes, up or down, then I lost my train of thought here. And the annual budgets for the township have been running what they have been recently. It would appear to me that it would cost us an increase of over 10% a year in taxes. Now, I don't, that's rough arithmetic, but if you had $2 more million every year and your current annual budgets are running, what are they, 17 or something, it would seem like that's going to increase our taxes by 10% or more, maybe 20% every year.
We just say that you're right and you're wrong. It could increase your taxes by more than 2%, but you still would be within the levy cap because there are several exceptions to the levy cap. One of them being the increase in debt service from from the current year to the prior year. So if your debt service in 2014 is, let's just say, $5 million, and with the new issue, your debt service in 2015 is $6 million, well, you get an add-on to that 2% of that $1 million.
But still you have to pay the money though, right?
Right, you have to pay the money, correct. But
So
you're still within the levy cap.
Within the levy cap?
Yes, because there's an add-on to the levy cap.
I have
It's
to read the
2% plus.
charts when you
Just like
show
if the
them.
township gets an increase in the pension cost, that's another, the increase from the current year, from the prior year to the current year is an increase. Increase in debt services from the
Yeah,
prior year to the current year.
One other
It's an
minor
increase.
question. If the total, and one of the options, if the total assessment of the town goes up, then we're going to go up a lot more compared to the other 20 townships in Berkeley Heights. And I would think that could change our equalization factor and change your average number if you want to use it, or change the debt service.
We can't determine what the equalization.
I know. That's why I'm saying.
Based on the numbers that we have, which is the assessed value for 2014 with any increases based on option 2, your range of increases in debt service would be from $280 to $323. That's what the number is. It's not percentage.
But if our current total assessed value in the township, from the multi-billions that it is, goes up,
that's what it did.
yeah, relative to all the other townships, it's going to change our equalization rate. Did you take that into account?
Well, it might increase your equalization factor, but the equalization factor is only a factor when it's equalized for county tax purposes. Your own local tax is based on the actual percentage that the assessor assigns to your property, and that's based on sales throughout the year. So your ratio right now is like 54.9 or 55.
Right.
Depending on the sales during the year 14, that ratio for 15 could be 56, it could be 54, it could be 52. We don't know that. That's got nothing to do with the numbers that we're throwing out here. What the numbers here would reflect are the net valuation taxable. And to come to the average local assessment, all we did was take from the tax duplicate the number of residential line items within the community divided by the assessed value of those properties. So this does not include commercial or industrial or any other
All right. Thank you.
classifications of property
Now,
other than residential.
Is there, I don't know the answer to this, but is there an impact of this township tax factor that you've just mentioned through the school or the county? Do they come in indirect in some way?
No, this is just, all we're
No,
doing is just a
will there
municipal.
be an impact? Is there?
Well, whatever the municipal, whatever the county rate or whatever the school rate, whatever they strike.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to have an impact, just like it does every year when.
But there
the
will be no
taxes-
relationship,
No, because this is well.
right?
In regards to what you're saying, you can look at it another way. The assessed value here is giving you a tax rate which is lower for your municipal purposes. Likewise, now the school levy and the county levy is a designated pot. So as the increase in valuations go up, that pot gets spread over a larger number. So in reality, you could see a reduction in your school or county taxes based on the equalized value.
All right, thank you.
Herb Sorkin, 10 Meadowview Lane. This got so arcane, I forgot my question. But seriously, you had said that option 1, there would be no increase from increased ratables. But if we left things alone, and as I understand it, Little Flower Church has got some financial issues. If we let them sell the property on their own, wouldn't that property be developed by someone? And wouldn't that property then generate some ratables?
That's not something for us in our calculation. That would be something that, I mean, you're talking hypothetical.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the first meeting, the discussion on the reverter clause, and I'm not even sure about it having to remain as an educational use. Would that be even a taxable structure? I think I'm getting too far away from my comfort level to honestly try and answer that question.
Then let me ask another question. If we are developing residential property where the town hall currently exists, has anyone considered moving forward what the increase in residential properties will do in terms of the school population? When you add to this mix, we're talking about putting 160 residences into Kings. I mean, within the next 20 years, we'll be looking to build a new school.
Next week, we're going to talk about the redevelopment plan. I have the demographics. I have a chart. I will make sure it's very large. I apologize for some of these graphics tonight, but we will talk about the impact of school-age children and how many children are expected in this type of development.
I'm new to the party. Thank you.
Hi, Michael Merlot, 40 Oak Hill Way. Do you know what the total debt is of this town? So we're going to add 27 million on top of whatever we owe now, right?
I don't have the order.
Can I ask my second question while you're looking? My taxes now have 3 components to it, right? I mean, Mr. Bonacci's confusing me. I'm paying an education tax, I'm paying a county tax, and I'm paying the city.
Correct.
All right. So the $200 to $250 is just affecting that one portion, which is
correct, the
city.
municipal portion.
So the county tax could go up at the same time that goes up, and the education tax, all 3 of them go up simultaneously at the same time. This is only, we're only dealing with one portion of that.
This is the only tax that the council can control.
Right. Which is right, exactly.
Yes.
The only tax that the council.
That's
can
the only
control.
tax that the township can control.
Tom Forager again. Okay, as you increase the assessed value,
If I can go
then,
back to your first question, sir?
Yeah.
The town right now has bonds payable of $7.8 million. This is at the end of 13, December 13. We have environmental infrastructure loans with the state of New Jersey of $6.3 million. We have temporary financing of $3.055 million. That's our debt at the end of 13. 13, 16, about $17 million.
Go ahead.
okay, previous gentleman said that there's three components. Yeah, there is actually a fourth component, which is the library tax. Now, did your calculations take into account the effect on the library tax?
No, this is strictly the municipal tax rate.
Okay, so you're ignoring the effect on the library tax then?
Well, we're not necessarily ignoring it. It's just that this is the municipal rate. I mean, the library rate by law is struck at 1/3 of a mil. So
Right.
that is consistent every year. The council has no control over it. That's the minimum tax that has to be raised. This is only the municipal portion.
Okay, does the equalized valuation change?
On option 2, no.
The equalized valuation has no effect on the tax rate of the municipality other than how it affects the county taxes.
But it does affect the library tax, right?
It affects the millage on the library tax.
Okay, so
It
basically...
it affects the levy on the library.
All right, so as you increase the assessed value, the equalized value goes up, and therefore the library tax goes up, right?
Correct.
Okay, but that part's been ignored.
I'm sorry?
Correct? But that effect of the project on the library tax has not been taken into account, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
This is just talking about the library. I can't read these numbers, so I know tomorrow morning when I pick up my CD, every Tuesday morning I print it out, everything that's on the CD. So if you want to stop in the library and read it on paper, which I see a lot better, feel free. We also have the CD to loan, and we have the DVD, which is like a hot ticket item at the moment. So we have them all if you'd like to see them.
Charlie Pratt, 45 Park Avenue. Quick question. Ratables. Ratables has always got this little persona that it's going to do something to really, lower taxes or make something positive happen, and it usually doesn't. My question is, with these ratables that are going to generate this income, the anticipated income, is that going to be enough to pay the debt service or anticipated debt service, do you figure, for the amount that we're going to bond?
Well, again,
The question is, will the increase in ratables cover the debt service?
Yes.
No, because you already heard the assessors say that the increase in ratables will produce $833,000, which is total,
Okay.
of which approximately $142,000 is municipal share.
Correct.
The debt service, depending on what schedule you use, is approximately $2 million, using round numbers.
Okay.
That's why there's an increase in the tax rate. That's why there's an increase in your tax bill.
Now, when you increase the ratables, you increase the overall township base. When the county sets its taxes, it's a very disproportionate way they do it. I know that's something you don't have control over, nor does your crystal ball have any accuracy to predict. But when you add more ratables to a town, isn't it more likely that the county is going to take a bigger piece of the pie from our wedge?
Not necessarily, because depending on how the equalization factor works, for example, if towns have a revaluation, you'll generally find the year that the town has a revaluation, their county taxes go down because the assessed value now is at 100% and there's no ratio or no equalization to add to it. So that whole process and that whole program is a lesson in and of itself.
Final comment is, at one point, the town was in surplus of over $1 million, and when we had some tax appeals, we had some favored status from AT&T or Lucent that they gave us a break to work with us to pay it back and everything. What it came down to is that surplus was gone. council members present, some have even commented that they can't be responsible for what has happened in the past. You can't unring a bell. This project, unfortunately, is going to go well beyond the term of anybody that serves on council now. So what we're looking at is the project will be in place, but we're going to have a team of brand new spenders in there. If somebody takes these numbers back down to a minimum to almost non-existent level, that's going to make our future tax increases go right through the roof.
Once this project is voted on by the governing body and the debt service is authorized and issued, that's set in stone. The only thing that could happen there is if the market turns to a favorable, makes a favorable turn, and the bonds have the option to be called, we can call the bonds, refinance the bonds, and pay less for the bonds, for the debt service. So there's no way that they can increase or they can increase spending. It's locked in.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I just want to remind everybody, next Monday night, 7 o'clock, we'll have our fourth and final meeting. That meeting will focus on the redevelopment plan, and if we were to move forward with option 2 and relocate the municipal services to the Church of Little Flower and Snyder Avenue properties, what would we do with the municipal complex? And we'll spend most of the time talking about additional tax information as well as pilots, potential pilots that could be beneficial to the township, that could just provide more favorable numbers. We'll get into more detail of that next week, as well as the different various uses, densities, and so forth, school-age children, projections, and so forth. Thank you.
May I have a motion to adjourn?